Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on digital exporting and what you need to do to ensure your messaging is understood internationally. My name is William Barnes-Graham and I am the Digital Content Manager at Open to Export. We are a government-supported online community helping small UK businesses get ready to sell overseas through our step-by-step articles and guides, regular webinars, Ask the Experts forum, and our Export Action Plan tool. You can find all of these on our website at opentoexport.com. We will be running a live Q&A at the end of the session, and you can ask questions at any point during the webinar using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. We will also be reposting relevant questions onto our forum afterwards, so hopefully in one way or another you'll get useful answers to your questions. We don't typically share any slides, but we will be recording the webinar and uploading it to our YouTube channel, as well as linking to it on our webinars page, where you can also find out more about our upcoming webinars and listen to previous sessions. We have three great speakers today. Kicking things off will be Daniel Kitchen from Yale, who will be talking about what you need to do to set up your website for international business. We'll then have Rob Gorby from SDL Managed Translation, who will be talking about how you can ensure your online messaging is understood in new markets. Finally, we have Colin Dean, who will be rounding things off with his experiences selling special IAPs overseas. Special IAPs develop educational apps for children with special educational needs and are also a previous finalist at one of our Export Action Plan competitions. So to begin with, over to you, Daniel.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to cover some of the key elements you need to consider and work through when beginning to look at exporting overseas. The key thing here is, sorry, if you can move to the next slide. The key thing here is that once you're online, you're opening your business to a much wider audience, and whether you kind of like it or not, the fact is anyone can find your website online, either by your business name or address. Now really, what we want to do is make sure that we give you the tools and you build the platform in which you can start to express the key products and services that you wish to offer overseas, and that is in line with your core business strategy and your core beliefs. So to start with, you need to get the basics right. Make sure your site is designed in a way that's not offensive or displeasing to the eye, and the fact that you have your core business messages at the heart throughout. And if you think nowadays everyone's attention span is really limited, people on their phones while browsing on the net, or even browsing through mobile, people will move away from your site very quickly if they don't find it engaging. So on your site, what you need to do is ensure that you have your core business messages throughout, you have some neutral colours and nothing too displeasing to the eye, and that you have clear call to actions throughout. This will ensure that you drive as much conversion as possible, but gives the customer a belief that they know how to interact with you if they wish to make a purchase or they wish to contact you. On top of that, underneath the aesthetics, you need to look at the SEO strategy. Make sure you have the key elements in place like metadata, keywords, and core content that really drives what you're looking to be found for. Now, I know being online can be daunting, and the fact that security is often now in the news and mentioned. I think for me the key thing here is that you make sure that you have an SSL certificate assigned to your website, and nowadays you'll see in browsers that in the top left hand corner of the web address you're starting to see warning messages and red crosses when a site doesn't have SSL. Now you can get one of those online for free. Simply by doing a Google search you'll find a number of free options, or you can purchase one which is a full SSL certificate. Now what you typically find is that the big brands such as the big web companies and other companies like that will have a full secure security piece, which is just an extra step really in order to get them their security online. But what I would suggest is that you start off with a free one and then build towards a purchasing one. To be honest, the free ones generally cover the core elements. Google doesn't use anything more technical than the free version. And then really, these are kind of the fundamental pieces that you need to have in place in the UK or exporting online. And if you don't have them in place, you're almost starting in a bad place when you look to move online. And then if we can just go to the next slide. So once you're ready and you've got those key elements in place, you need to really start thinking about what products you're looking to offer. And these aren't the products that you're looking to offer in the UK, but the products you're looking to offer nationally, and to what markets you're looking to offer them to. So there is a risk here that you might look to just say, look, I want to advertise everything overseas. And the risk there is that you'll potentially waste money and you won't really have time to learn around the right products and the right messaging. So for me, there's a couple of things you need to consider. Maybe pick 10 to 20 products, and that they might be a broad range of different products you offer. And begin with those and plan to measure the success and the messaging on your site throughout. As part of that, when you're selecting these, you need to ask yourself a number of questions like, are you looking to land grab and look to sell high volume in a certain region or a certain country? And that might be at low cost and profit potentially. Or are you looking to maximize the profit, and therefore you may wish to pick the products that make the most value? For me, the key there is really about getting the balance and to think about what you see as being your most attractive products, as in these are the ones that will drive new customers and your acquisition strategy. Now, they may change when you start dealing with foreign territory, so don't expect them to be the same across any geo. So when you test this out, that is one of the things that you're looking to measure: what products work well and what products don't work well, and then work your marketing messages and your plan around these. And we'll come back to that later, just around the plan and making sure that you have the right plan in place to deliver that. So just moving on to the next slide. So pricing and payments. Again, this isn't exactly the fun part of selling online, apart from probably the payments piece. But really, the key here is to make sure that you speak to your payment gateway and you discuss exactly what you need to have in place with them from an agreement point of view, to make sure that there's no hidden charges or hidden costs that arise as you go through that. Typically, you know, with the likes of WellPay or PayPal, they have resources online in which you can see these. But for me, give them a call, talk it through, and make sure that you're completely confident that as you move forward, you're not going to have hidden costs that come and kind of slap you in the face after doing a great sell and a great job of advertising overseas. The tax rules can be complex for different geos, particularly in areas like South America and China. I'd ensure that you have these configured in the back end of your store. There are several plugins that you can speak to your web developer about enabling that and making sure that really your site is kept up to date with the tax rules, just in case they change at any time. Currency is another complex piece. Again, in Europe, it's probably less complex, but as soon as you start going to the likes of South America and at the moment the fluctuation of the exchange rates, the key here is that you can hook in a currency calculator into the back end of your store, which will mean that you're always up to date. If you do this manually, there's always a risk associated to it and an exposure from a monetary point of view that you could be open to. One, it could price you out of foreign markets, but two, it can also leave you out of pocket in terms of profit and margin that you make on your products. And then lastly, this is one thing that people do forget about, and I think it is really important for customers to get their notifications and their order confirmations, any email settings that you have in your back-end store, configured in a way that they can be easily translated, but also on top of that, that they can work across the markets that you're looking for. If I'm a customer and I'm interacting with a store, I expect to receive a confirmation of my order and then expect to potentially receive a follow-up which tells me when it's going to be delivered. If I don't get those, it may leave me concerned, and I may cancel my payment or contact my bank because I might be worried about some sort of fraudulent activity. So I think they're key, and you need to have those in place. And really the top tip there is to get advice. I can't highlight that enough. Speak to an accountant about the tax and currency pieces, and speak to your payment provider about the payment gateways, and then lastly your web developer or your marketing department about the kind of email notifications and any back-end configuration you need to have in place. If we just move on to the next slide. Again, shipping, again it's pretty straightforward, but again for me, lean on someone else's expertise here. Let them worry about the pain, and look to partner with an international carrier. Some of those are mentioned on here, but they can advise you on any issues or any considerations you need to take, and will also support you in that, which for me means that you can get on with your core job of running your business while they worry about the delivery and shipping elements. Customs declarations, as long as your products are legal, they should be fine, but just make sure that you look up and read up on any customs in the area. Sorry about that. And then as part of that, you should leave kind of the import duties to the purchaser. I think you should always state in your terms and conditions, make sure they're up to date. If there's any delivery charges or any hidden costs to the end consumer, that they're in your terms and conditions or made clear on your site. Just move on to the next slide. So I know Rob is going to cover some of the core translation pieces later, but the key here is that, you know, from a translation point of view, people think it's easy. It's not. And Google Translate is only on average around 80% accurate, and it won't always update all the elements of your site. So look to cover off with a professional translation service. Ensure people are clear on how to toggle the different languages if they can choose to. In particular in certain industries, that's really important. And then ensure all the SEO elements and metadata are structured and translatable. And what I mean by that is, you know, the way terms are translated can often mean that words get mixed around, and the way people search in different countries is different. So again, speak to the experts about that, but as part of a translation service, they should be able to advise on any kind of SEO and key metadata elements that are there to support you on that. And then just moving on to the final slide. So this, for me, is the key. And whether we like it or not, we have to plan and make sure we have a real plan about how your business and how you want it to be received overseas or in the geos that you're targeting. Focus on maybe a couple of areas at a time. Don't try and conquer the world immediately. And make sure you have your house in order before you look to do that. So get your site to the place you need it to be for the UK, and then look to build on that and take that overseas. Share the burden. Don't take all the problems on yourself. Throughout, you know, I've talked about experts and payment providers, shipping providers. Lean on them to give you your advice. The key thing is they've done a lot of this before. They've worked with businesses like yours and the likes of Open to Export. They can advise you on the best steps to take in order to get the right plan in place, so you don't end up with hidden costs or any issues downstream. Then as you move into the prepare phase, you should be looking to plan your live date. Look when you're going to put that in place and work towards that. Build a bit of anticipation in your organisation. Speak to your marketing team if you have one, or start to put some stuff out online or on social through Facebook and other means, and that will start to build a bit of traction and get people to look to like your page and put some advertising out there. The key thing for me is that you don't leave a stone unturned. Before you do a beta launch, I would always test first with a series of products, and then you'd do probably a much more chunkier launch as you move into understanding what works well and what doesn't. But the last stage, it does say perform, and performance is key, and the other side of that is monitoring and making sure that you analyze throughout. So if I have my 10 products online, in the first couple of weeks, I might be monitoring how they're working, and I might be tweaking slight elements. But what I'd look to do is put a meeting or some time in the diary on a monthly basis to look at my website analytics and make sure I can understand where the traffic's coming from, what type of terms are people looking for, and what are they looking at, and how long are they staying on my site. Then as a result, I would make a plan every month to make some slight tweaks and changes in order to deliver more success as we move through. Now, there's no hidden gem here. There's no written rules around what you can put in place to make this work. The key is that you measure, you plan, and then you prepare again, and then you measure. And you just have to keep going around in order to drive your overall performance. And that really is in any shape of the UK or any other country that you're looking to exploit. And then really just finally for me, at Yale, we aim to provide the platform for businesses with the opportunity to grow their business overseas. And I think there is a market out there for any business as long as you plan, you prepare, and then you perform and analyse throughout. And then I'll just hand you back to Will to cover the rest of the webinar. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thank you, Dan. A really great overview of selling online, especially internationally, and some really great tips. We're going to move on now to our next speaker, and it's kind of covering the crux of today's kind of session, which is making sure your offering is understood. So I'm going to hand over to Rob Gorby from SDL Managed Translation.
Thanks, Will. If you could move on a slide, please. Very interesting insights from Dan there. And one thing that caught my interest is his term about getting lost in translation. People often assume that translation is just for your website and it's just for the copy that appears on your website. But what I'd suggest you do before you start looking to move into new markets is consider your broader business. Consider your brand name, your company, how you want to go to market to make sure that your overall offering is not actually going to get lost in translation. A few interesting examples here from around the world in businesses where their actual brand name or product name or signpost just didn't quite work out. So if you can move on, Will, I wanted to talk about why language is important. And interestingly, if you consider only 27% of the world's online population speak English, you can understand that from a volume perspective, there are a lot of people out there who don't have English as a first language. And of those, 72% of them will spend most of their time on websites in their own language. So in terms of the volume of people out there who are looking for websites and businesses speaking their language, it's pretty large. But more interestingly, I believe, is the fact that over half of consumers tell us that they would be willing to pay more if businesses gave them information in their own language. And we can see that throughout the entire customer journey. If you speak to people in their language, they are more likely to buy your products and pay you more for them. So again, not only from a volume of consumer perspective, but also in terms of the value that you can attract from those consumers. So just moving on, often in business we talk about the fact that first impressions count, and that is really true when you're moving into new markets. The importance of that first impression is extremely important. And again, I challenge you to consider whether or not you're happy for your first impression as a business to be made using a basic machine translation tool. Okay, I think it's really important that you're putting your best step, your best foot forward and really creating a strong first impression. And moving on, you'll see that actually for those businesses that don't really pay enough attention to language, particularly on their websites, the fact is if consumers can't read, they won't buy. Now this research from Common Sense Advisory, it points out the fact that 2 of the top 4 reasons for people abandoning websites from foreign companies are language related. So either the navigation is not appearing in their language, or the site keeps reverting back to English. And a point Dan made about, for example, payment providers, this is one we often find that catches businesses out, where they may translate their site, but once a consumer goes to purchase, the actual payment provider or payment gateway doesn't reflect the language of the website. And so it's very important that you consider all of the plugins, all of the partners you're working with, and make sure that their language settings are aligned to your website language. So moving on, Will, things do go wrong, and here's just a few examples from some pretty well-known brands who have got their translations wrong over the years. So it can happen to the best of them. I'd actually argue that these businesses are lucky, and what I mean by that is they had some pretty high-profile mistakes out there. They got picked up pretty quickly and gave that brand an opportunity to change and move on from that mistake. The bigger issue, in my opinion, for smaller businesses is when the translations are just not quite right. They're just not quite spot on. And what happens is they're losing conversions. They're losing conversions on their website, or they're not engaging with consumers, but they don't really know why. They can't put their finger on it. And it's usually down to poor translation. If you consider, as Dan suggested, you've only got a few seconds nowadays to catch a consumer's attention. And that's if you're trying to catch their attention in their own native language. If you're trying to catch their attention in a language that's not native to them, you've got milliseconds. Your likelihood is you're not going to catch their attention and engage with them. So again, yes, high profile issues out there, but I would say be more wary of the fact that actually when translations aren't quite right, that can be almost like a silent killer of growth. So moving on, Will. There's an expression in the industry that says there is only one language. And when you say this to an English-speaking person, yes, it's English, isn't it? No, it's not. And if you just move on, Will, the only language that matters is the language of your customer. So whatever the native language of your customer is, that's the only language that really matters to you when you're going global and going international. Yes, there's plenty of stats out there that shows that you need 13 or more languages to address 90% of the online population, but really that doesn't matter. What really matters is what market are you going to, what language do they speak, and that's the most important language for you to consider. So if we move on, I just wanted to share a few thoughts around when you are creating content, not only for your website but also for your campaigns and for all your marketing activity. I think it's important that you consider not just language but also cultural relevance. And if you just flick on there for a moment, simple examples of, when you use imagery, for example, in your campaigns, just be very aware of what those images mean around different cultures and different. So when you talk about the owl in the US or even in the UK, it's often seen as a symbol of wisdom, but actually in India it's seen as a symbol of stupidity. In Saudi Arabia it's bad luck, illness, death. So you can see how images actually can mean very different things in different markets. So be careful when you're looking to just purely translate. You've got to really consider localization. Again, moving on, you can see a lack of eye contact, for example. We know that to mean insecurity or distrust. But actually when you go to Asia and you look at Japan, China, that's a symbol of respect. Again, the number 7, if we move on, North America, that's seen as a lucky number. In Hong Kong, that's actually got sexual connotations. So again, just being mindful of what numbers mean as well, pretty important. And finally, color. You look at red, again, in the US and a lot of Europe is seen as a symbol of love or action or danger, whereas actually in Asia, that's happiness or luck. And in Africa, it's often seen as a symbol of death and mourning. So again, really consider it, but also the symbols, the images, and the cultural relevance of your brand and your website. So moving on. The important point I wanted to make is we've got to think not only translation, we've got to move beyond translation and into localization and sometimes into transcreation. And there's a few differences here. When you speak of translation, literally that's taking your content and doing a literal word-for-word translation of it. There's no change to imagery, layout, or the brand. What I believe is much more engaging, much more relevant when you go global is that you look at localization and often transcreation, where, for example, in localization, yes, you keep the meaning the same, but you're translating the words and the message in a way that's culturally appropriate. And you're looking to change images to meet local cultures and expectations. And then on into transcreation. Again, transcreation is where you're creating different content, to meet different objectives, and you are really looking to change the way your business is portrayed in those markets. So my suggestion is go beyond translation and consider at the very least localization. And to do that, you need a provider who has got translators based in the local markets, because they will be able to give you the cultural insights into what is expected and understood in that market. It's very difficult when you're going into a market where you don't speak the language, you don't understand your own website in that foreign language. It's very difficult for you to really understand whether or not it's going to resonate. And so you need to make sure you've got a partner, a language service provider who's able to guide and advise on local culture and not just the words and the translations. So moving on, Will, people often say to us, okay, well that sounds quite expensive to get everything localized or even transcreated. What we do in SDL is we work with our customers to help them prioritize and categorize their content. Not all content needs proper human translation. Some of it can be machine translated. I don't as fits all. Some businesses think, oh, I either have to use machine translation for everything because I can't afford human translation, or to do human translation is going to be too costly. What we help you do is to prioritize and categorize your content so you're applying the right type of translation method to the right type of content. A couple of examples where you're doing advertising campaigns or user content for your audience, it's very important that that's really high quality. Going back to my point about first impressions count earlier. Whereas on the right-hand side, when it comes to things like, let's say, user reviews, where actually people are only reading those reviews to get a general understanding, then the accuracy of the content is not the highest priority, and therefore machine translation is appropriate for that type of content. So my recommendation is, again, work with your translation agency to categorize the content and make sure you're applying a type of translation to that content. So now I wanted to share a few tips, if you move on, Will, on translation across different activities that you may be running, and how to make sure that you are preparing your website, your videos, your SEO for international markets. So looking at websites, first of all, a few key tips here when you are working on websites. This will help you in international markets, help make your life easier as you go global. So starting on the left-hand side, again, consider the fact that text will be of different sizes in different markets. For example, German is usually around 30% more than English. Japanese maybe around 30% less. And so you need to allow your web pages to auto-resize based on the language that you're using. Again, in terms of the coding and fonts, it's using Unicode encoding and fonts. That again makes it easier from a localization perspective. As Dan said, SEO is really key. So making sure that you have meta descriptions and tells properly translated is really important to help you on that front. And I'd just like to share a little anecdote on the SEO side of things. Again, going back to Dan's point, if you consider the low-cost airline industry in Italy, for example, there the Italians don't actually search. The most popular keyword for low-cost airlines in Italy is not an Italian phrase, and it's not an English phrase. It's actually a hybrid. It's voli low cost. So the actual users there use a combination of an Italian word and an English word. If you're not aware of that, then when you are optimizing your activity for the Italian market, you're going to lose out on a huge proportion of the search volume. So again, that's something very important that you do consider the way people search in those local markets. On videos, just avoid using Flash, use HTML5, and make sure that you separate text from graphics. Again, that will make it cheaper and easier for you to translate your content as you move into new markets. Moving on, looking at SEO in a little bit more detail. Yes, most people think Google, but actually remember, depending on the market you're going into, there are some important local players from an SEO perspective. So really consider how your site and your activity is localized for those platforms. From a video point of view, moving on. Again, similar thing to Google. A lot of people think, okay, well, YouTube, okay, I'm going to just use YouTube. And yes, YouTube has got quite a large user base globally. However, again, in different markets, there are different local providers who are pretty strong, and it would be important that you make sure your videos are localized for those particular platforms. And on the video front, just moving on, video is really, really valuable as content. However, a lot of people assume that trying to run video across multiple countries and multiple languages is going to cost an absolute fortune. That's not the case. If you consider let's take a 5-minute video that costs you, say, £3,000 or just over £3,000 to create in English. You can actually create that same video in 14 additional markets using subtitling, for example. Or you could achieve 8 additional languages if you use a voiceover on that video. Additional markets if you use dubbing. So again, taking your core video content and using subtitling, voiceover, dubbing will help you then use that same content across multiple markets, multiple languages. It's not as expensive as you might think, and language service providers, translation agencies should be able to provide that service for you. But it does help make your content go further. If we look at mobile, again, considering mobile, a lot of countries actually, most internet access now is by mobile phone as opposed to PC. So really thinking about how you optimize for mobile is important. And actually what's the good news about mobile and particularly apps is that it can be quite inexpensive to localize, as there tends to be less content and words than on a traditional website. So always consider your mobile, your app, and make sure that's properly localized as well. Okay, moving on. I just want to leave you with a few final thoughts on what to look for when you do get a translation quote. So if you are looking for a translation, not all quotes are equal, and it's important that you're asking 5 or 6 specific questions. The first of those is make sure that you are getting the right type of translator for the content that you want translated. So for example, if you have legal content, you need to make sure that it's somebody who's specialized in legal who's translating that content for you. So very important that you match the type of content to the translator. Secondly, are the translators that are being used, are they in country and are they translating into their mother tongue? We ran a campaign recently comparing Slough Spanish with Seville Spanish and just asking the question, would you like to get your website translated in a version of Slough Spanish or in a version of Seville Spanish? And everybody obviously would prefer to make sure that it's been translated by a native into their mother tongue. Translation memory is key as well. So at SDL on Managed Translation platform, we store your memory, which means that the next time you go to update your website, you're not paying to translate the entire website again. You're only paying for the new content that you've optimized or changed. Again, that's really important. It will save you money in the long run. And consider whether or not things like a review is included. Is your translation being reviewed as well by a second translator? Again, that will save you the hassle of having to review it, and it will give you confidence that the quality of your translation is really strong. Well, make sure you're getting the content back in the format that you want. Okay, if you provided a brochure, a PDF brochure in a certain design and style, you want that design and style in the foreign language as well. You don't want to receive back a unformatted Word document that you then need to spend time and effort in formatting. So make sure you're getting that file back in the same format. And again, finally, is your provider scalable to your requirements? Okay, as you grow as a business, you're going to have more languages, more content. Can your provider scale with you as you grow? And final point, just wanted to mention the Managed Translation platform. If we move on a slide, Will, just a few key things about it. It's a very, very simple online platform where you can manage your translation projects. You very simply upload a file, you get a quote, an instant quote. You can then approve for the quote, pay for it. We then do the translation, and that file is then available for you to download from within the platform. So again, it saves a whole host of email trails, chasing projects, finding out where they are. You can have it all in one easy to use platform. And again, we've also got connections into things like WordPress, Salesforce, OneDrive. So wherever your content is stored, we can plug into those platforms and make your life easier in sending content to translation. So that's it from me. I'll pass you back to Will, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. A really great overview of translation and transcreation as a topic for exporters, and some really really intelligent and clever solutions for all of that. Before passing to Colin, just like to remind everyone that you can ask questions at any point during the session, and we'll be doing the Q&A just after Colin's presentation. But now to share some experiences of as an exporter, over to you, Colin.
Thanks, William, and thanks to Dan and Rob for your insights. Special iApps, we started 5 years ago developing educational apps for children with learning disabilities. And we've grown from 2 people to a team of 6 in the UK, with more than 50 translators around the world helping us. And we've had a lot of help with, as Will mentioned, we're previous open to export winners. If you move on to the next slide, Will. We are previous open to export winners, and we've taken all the advice we could possibly get from UKTI, now part of DIT. If you can get access to an international trade advisor, ours in the Northeast, Ian Howard and Sue Beverley, have been brilliant at pointing us in the right direction and helping us understand all the issues around exporting. And we now find that 5 years later, we have products in 25 languages and our website in 9 languages. As Dan said, it's perhaps best to concentrate on high-value products, and when I say 25 languages, only our highest volume, highest price products are currently in those 25 languages. And it's important to adapt to the market, because we started off thinking that we were developing apps to help teach children with Down syndrome. Now we've actually found that there are many more children with autism using our apps than for Down syndrome, and so we need to adjust our message to that particular audience. We're in a slightly unusual position because many people have approached us from around the world asking if we could have our apps in their language, from disability support organisations to speech therapists and so on. And so in many cases, we've been able to use their help to translate. And that's absolutely ideal, because they have the domain experience, they have the native language experience, they're all native speakers. And for our apps, we need spoken audio as well as written text. And having somebody who speaks the language and understands the nomenclature of teaching children is essential. They may not have the equipment, but in many cases they can use the facility of a local radio station studio or something like that to make a professional quality recording for us. SEO, as has been mentioned beforehand, is very important, and we have reached the point now where in a search on Google for apps for Down syndrome in the UK, we're not just on the first page, but with the first entry on the first page. And SEO is incredibly important on your website to making that happen. So if we could have the next slide, please, Will. I think my key message on this slide is don't underestimate the opportunities for exporting. 2/3 of our downloads are from outside the UK of our apps, and 1/3 of our downloads are from people who don't have English as their first language. And if we were to ignore those markets, our turnover would be a lot less, and we'd be reaching and helping a lot less children. As Rob said earlier, translation and localization and transcreation are not the same thing, so I won't go into that in any further detail. But I would like to make a key point about languages versus country. A language and a country aren't the same thing. If you were selling medical products 2 hospitals in Germany, then fine, that's a country. But in a digital marketplace, people all around the world speaking different languages, don't assume that the language and the country are the same thing. So for instance, we sell more apps in Austria than in Germany, both German speaking, but we wouldn't use a German flag to identify our German website because the Austrians don't use the German flag. A third of native Polish speakers don't live in Poland. So their web browser may well be configured to use Polish as the language, but they may be coming from the UK or the US or somewhere. So you need to present your message to the person in the language they speak, as well as addressing the issues of where they're going to buy their products. I would also stress that English isn't just English, and that US English is a fairly specialized dialect that is not spoken by and not spelt the same way as the rest of the world. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, even Canada, all use British spelling, and some people can get a bit upset if everything looks very American. So in fact, we have both US and English rest of world pages on our website. Next slide, please. Now, I agree with Rob's book translation tips. They're all absolutely key points, and I would recommend you follow those. This is the Special iApps website as it would appear on a desktop browser in Spanish. And so you'll see on this page that every single word, apart from brand names like App Store, are in Spanish. And the graphics has Spanish in it. There is a video on our front page which has no spoken text. It actually is just videos of children using our apps with musical background, and the captions underneath we can change per language. And that solves the issue of translation of the video for us, certainly in Western Europe and so on. It wouldn't be suitable for an Arabic market because of the lady who's got her hair covered and so on. And an alternative, as was said earlier, if you have got spoken audio, will be to use something like subtitles. And we host our videos on both Vimeo and YouTube, so that different markets who may prefer to use one or the other can get to them. So this is a page in Spanish for the Spanish audience. That doesn't mean, as I said before, Spain. A Spanish speaker could be in many countries of the world, including a significant number of people in the US. And the badges on our website for going to the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store to actually buy your apps, it's important that they take the person to the store in their country where it's priced in their currency. So if you were Spanish speaking and in the United States, our site would automatically, if your browser says you speak Spanish, present you our Spanish site. But when you click on the download on the App Store, it will take you to the US App Store because that's where you are to purchase it. And there are many different ways you can organize your website, but we've gone for the model in which we just have one website, www.specialiapps.org, and then underneath it, ES is our Spanish pages, DE would be our German pages, and we have 2 sets of English pages for the British and rest of the world and for the United States. We started off with .co.uk and .com websites for the UK and US markets, but actually we found that we were splitting our visits and so suffering in Google rankings, and actually those sites now just point back to the single .org site. Next slide, please. So here are some questions that you might want to think about. Can a distributor or agent help you? You don't have to do all the work yourself or try and find a translator in the UK necessarily. If you have a distributor or agent, or in our case, disability organisations in other countries and so on, they know exactly the local market and they may be more than happy to help you with translation. The model we're adopting is that for some languages we translate the full site, but you don't necessarily have to translate it all. You might have a mini site which is just most of the important pages, Or you could even have a microsite. If you've only got 1 or 2 products translated into Russian, say as we have, then we're about to put out just a microsite for Russian, which covers what we can usefully say to the Russian audience. And as was mentioned earlier, most visitors are probably using a phone. This screenshot here is of our Dutch front page on an iPhone. If we flick back to the previous slide, Rob, you'll see, William, that if we had our normal desktop website and we tried to display it on a phone, it would be illegible and impossible to navigate. It's got 4 different items across the navigation bar at the top. It's got a 2-column layout. If we go, William, back to the next slide again, the actual same words and same images and same video are presented to a phone user in a completely different layout. There's no navigation bar. They tap the menu button and it allows them to navigate around the site. And increasingly, people will be expecting your site to look right on a mobile device. Again, I would emphasize the point that the only right language is the user's language, and you should redirect the user to the site in their language without them having to. So that if your browser is Dutch on your phone and you go to specialized.org, it should redirect you to the Dutch pages. If you're just getting basic translations, someone converting your English into French or Spanish or whatever, I wouldn't recommend paying more than 10 or 12p per word. On the other hand, if they're adding extra value and you can establish a long-term relationship with them, then that may be a different matter. As has been said many times, don't use Google to translate English into another language. Just by way of example, I bought a pair of ski gloves last week, and it has a label inside, and in English it says, contains materials of animal origin, which is referring to the leather. Underneath, in French, it had what said in French, does not contain materials of animal origin, the complete negative. And if this were foodstuffs and about peanuts, you could end up in court. So one of the things I suggest you do, although don't use Google to translate out of English, run the translation you have for a foreign language back through Google into English. It may be that your translator is very good but has misunderstood something you were trying to say and translated it completely differently. In some cases, it will even find spelling mistakes in the foreign language that they have failed to spot. So that's very helpful. Just to close, I will just say 2 other things. Think about updates. It's not sufficient to have a big bang, create a website for a foreign language, and then expect that's it. Because when you have new products and things like that, you will need to be able to make updates, and you need to have somebody available to do that for you at a cost-effective price. And if you had a contract with somebody to do a one-off translation, they may charge you quite a lot just to make a small change if they're busy doing other things. Lastly, do you have backups of all this stuff that you've carefully translated? There was an example recently of a cloud service which had a catastrophic failure of its online storage. So its disks died and the data couldn't be recovered. The cloud provider went to their offline backups, which they'd been dutifully taking, only to discover that all their backups were empty because of something technical that had gone wrong, but they'd never noticed. So they irrevocably lost customer websites. And so I would urge you not to just trust that there's a copy of it all in the cloud, but make sure that you have all the text so that you could reconstruct it if you needed to. Okay, thanks, William. That's me.
Thank you, Colin. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating and a really great company as well. So really good to hear some of your experiences. We're going to open the floor now to questions. And the first of these is from Zandra. And this is probably something you've alluded to briefly, Colin. So I can ask this to you. Zandra asks that she'd like her website to showcase her products, but for distributors and agents to access rather than as a public-facing company website. How would you advise she go about this?
Well, the first thing is, I think, as Dan said originally, is that that you need to have a website that uses SSL, that's got an HTTPS address, because then the communications are secure. And then you can get your website developer or web provider to set up password protection on some of the pages. I mean, so for instance, we have pages on our site which only our team are allowed to access by logging in. We also have another area of pages on our site for pre-release versions of our apps that we want people to test, and those testers have a login to that, whereas the rest of the general site isn't password protected. So that's a well-known technical way of dealing with that issue.
Thank you, Colin. And we've had a translation question in from Ian, and it's kind of about social media, and it's kind of to what extent or kind of what level do you need to translate things like your social media messaging on your scale, or is it something where you should set up different social media accounts? Kind of how do you approach social media in different countries? So that's for Rob.
It's best to have social media geared towards the local country, because again, the topic, the theme, the campaign will be more relevant to that market. I mean, failing that, yes, you can translate. However, I would say just be careful of, what is that campaign? What is that information you're tweeting about? And is it relevant to the country you're trying to translate it into? I would say you're actually better off doing a really good job of translating your content in fewer markets than doing a poor job in lots of markets. And so if you're not in a position where you can support the full kind of end-to-end in a particular language, then my suggestion would be reconsider whether or not you actually try and run the activity in that language.
Thank you, Rob. And a question from Veronica, which might be for Daniel. Veronica says some businesses don't have web developers because their websites are often off-the-shelf e-commerce platforms. So how do you deal with inputting currency conversions into things like that, Daniel?
Yeah, so with that, I would speak to the provider. They should have help areas and sections around selling overseas and different currencies. They will either have online tutorials of how to configure that or look at that yourselves, or they'll be able to point you in the direction of potentially someone that can support you with that. As part of that, in partnership, speak to your payment provider as well as and let them know what platform you're using, because they can always give you guidance around, okay, we've dealt with that platform before. I know there's various kind of big Shopify kind of Equid type players that will have this in their back end, but anyone can really guide you. But I would always talk to both in order to get kind of a single view of the world from both sides of it, because your payment provider will be able to advise you if that's necessarily the right way of doing it with the way you want to take your payment. So it's just the marriage of the two is key.
Thank you, Daniel. And we've had another question in from Remy, and the question is kind of how useful is the translate this page option that is given on search engines such as Google, and can we use this as an option, and what is required in order for our data to be acceptable for this? Rob, can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So using the Google Translate app will allow users to get their site translated. Again, just bear in mind that is a machine translation. It will give users a general understanding of what's being said on your site. But again, if you're really trying to make a good first impression, you're probably better off considering potentially particularly for home pages and important web pages, more accurate and higher quality human translation for those. But you can get the Google plugin, for example. But like I say, I think that is only good to get a general understanding of what's being said.
Thanks, Rob.
If I could just chip in, Colin, here, just to say you can try it the other way around to get a feel for what it's going to be like. If you go to a site like the French Railways or something in French and then ask Google to translate it for you, get an idea of the sort of quality that comes out from these.
Thanks, Rob and Colin. Yeah, really good useful advice there. And a question from Helen. Helen's asking, She wants to host pages in key overseas territories throughout the world, but she's kind of asking, how do you go about that? She's told that in order for Google to pick up the site with foreign content, it would need at least 10 pages per territory. Is that correct? So I'm going to put that to Daniel first.
So I don't believe that is correct. There's several ways in which you can do it. The key thing for me is with regards to hosting the pages. So there's two sides of it. Hosting the pages, it shouldn't make much of a difference about hosting the pages here or in the US, with everything now kind of going towards the cloud route anyway. The key thing is making sure that, one, similar to in Colin's presentation, he talked about the domains and how he had relevant domains for each kind of geo, and that would be picked up by Google. Having 10 pages, the volume of pages is really irrelevant. It's more about the quality of content. Google is trying to deliver the right page for that customer at the right time. So whether there's 100 pages or 10 pages, it shouldn't really make a difference. So I know that doesn't directly answer your question around how best to go about that, but for me it's about, if you kind of follow the key steps and have the fundamentals right, alongside potentially you could have multinational domains, you should be able to get indexed by Google at any point in that. So, and I don't know if Rob or Colin, if you've got anything to add there.
Yes, Colin here. I would say one of the things to bear in mind if you want to go down that route is to realise that there are actually residence requirements in some countries. So, for instance, if we wanted to have a Norwegian website, a specialhires.no, we would have to have somebody in an office in Norway, with that being the address of the organisation. So it's great to give the impression of a local presence, but if you don't have a local presence, genuinely, then it may not make sense.
Thank you, Colin and Daniel. I'm going to do one last question, and it's from Bojan, and it's a translation question for Rob. And it's kind of, is there a benefit in using in-house or freelance translators? Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, again, I think from a, as I was saying earlier around translators, the in-house translators where they are both in country and also working directly for your translation service provider, you'll tend to get a better quality of translation from them. Again, they will be able to spend time understanding your brand guidelines, what you're trying to say. We often find that businesses who use different translators at different times, depending on who's available from within a freelance pool, will get inconsistencies in how those translations are sound across a language. So you want to make sure that you've got real consistent language, you've got the specialist skills in that translator, and they are translating into their mother tongue. So yes, it does make a difference to make sure that actually they are in-house and in-country translators.
Yeah, that can work really well. At Special IAPS, we have a program whereby we take interns from local universities. And so we had a couple of students this year, one of whom was native German and one of whom happened to be native Polish. And getting them to do our translations meant they were here, they knew exactly what we were talking about, and it worked very well.
That's actually, that's really fascinating. So yeah, I mean, I think on that note, we've had the full hour. So thank you once again to Rob, Daniel and Colin. Some great answers, and the presentations were absolutely fantastic too. So thank you very much to all three of you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye.
Great. So I'd like to remind everyone that we will be posting some of these questions onto our forum over the next couple of weeks. So please do keep your eyes peeled for these. Let us know if you'd like to withdraw your question from this process. Thank you to SDL for sponsoring and supporting today's webinar and for helping us with content around digital exporting and translation over the last few months. They've just published a new ebook entitled Act Local, Think Global, which I definitely recommend as great reading for new exporters. Our next webinar is on trade agreements and what you need to know about them. It takes place in April, and it's obviously going to tackle some pretty key issues over the next few years, so we hope you can make that. That's all from us for now. Please take our survey as you exit to let us know what you thought of today's webinar and to give us any suggestions for improvements or future topics. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the week.